Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about contractor contracts. Now, what I mean by that is I want to talk a little bit about if you're thinking of doing contracting, and I've only had experience in the game industry and not the indie space of the game industry. I'm just going to talk about some things you may want to think about when you're reviewing a contract. Now, I've already talked about being a contractor, like the difference between doing contract work on a game versus being an employed member of the team on the game. So I'll link that video below. I'm not going to talk about comparing an employed member of the team versus being a contractor. And there are differences you should be aware of. So I recommend watching that video. I've also talked about publishing contracts, which are very different than contractor contracts. Publishing contracts are when you're making a game for a publisher. And those have things like royalties and breach of contract terms and monthly rates and a lot of things like that. And I talk about things to look out for in that video. So if you're thinking about doing a game for a publisher, watch that one. Also, big caveat, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a guy who's done this a lot, sitting here wearing an old peanut shirt, trying to give you an idea of what's up. So, have a lawyer, have them review your contracts. Like publishing deals, though, when you are going to be a contractor, they usually give you, the contracting company usually supplies you a contract. But don't think that you're not allowed to make changes to it and talk to them about it. In fact, it's usually expected a little bit back and forth. Not every contractor is the same. So I want to talk about things that you should think about in your contract as a contractor. So I've mentioned this before in the what's it like to be a contractor, but remember that you're responsible for a lot more things as a self-employed contractor. So you need to charge more for your employment rate. The way to do this is figure out what you were paid as an employee and convert that to an hourly rate, and then bump it up. I know people bump it up 20%. I know people bump it up 50%. Here's why. You will be paying self-employment tax. You will be doing that quarterly. So, and you may be paying someone to do that. You can pay it yourself, but you may be paying an accountant to estimate what that is. That's just expenses that you have that you wouldn't have as an employee. You also have to buy your own medical, dental, vision insurance. It's on you. The rates for that are much worse than rates you get at a company. Individual health plans usually cost a lot more than company health plans because there's not a pool of people to throw you into. You will be paying for your own equipment. Sometimes contracts have them supplying you some equipment, but only if it's specialized. Usually if they're supplying you too much, like if they give you the computer you're working on, that may not be a contract anymore. You may be a work from home employee. So you're expected, I believe, to minimum have your own computer. You also have to have space to work. Look around your house. Is there enough space in here for you to work? Will you have to rent an office somewhere? Or you have to occasionally go to one of these temporary office renting places? I mean, like WeWork. I don't know if WeWork's still around. But will you have to go to some place like that? That all costs money. Even if you have a space in your house, you will have to set it up so that it's conducive to taking video calls from clients. And who knows how long those will be, when during the day those will be. So it can't be like if you're going to work from your dining room table and you need to take a call at 6 p.m. and you have a spouse and kids, that dining room table may not be where you can take video calls at 6 p.m. So think about that. And that, depending on what your answers are to that, you may need to adjust what your hourly contracting rate is. And also, I've never had to do this, but if you have to travel, make sure that they will pay for flights, pay for car. There's a mileage rate that's pretty standard, and a per diem, because when you're away from home, these are all expenses you're going to have that don't have anything to do with you being at home normally. So these are all work related. They should be paying for this. Now, I kind of touched on that when I talked about space to work, but you also have to think about availability. This is a multifaceted thing. The first thing you want to think about is, how are they supposed to contact you? You may say you want phone calls are preferred, or email, or some type of chat thing like Slack or Teams or Discord. In my experience, every company uses something slightly different. Depends on how big they are, depends on how big the team is, depends on software they already own. They will frequently expect you to have it. So if it's something that charges, put that back into your hourly rate, factor that in. You also have to think about your response time. If they email you, how long do they expect to get a response? You can say 24 hours, 48 hours. You may want to make that into business days and not regular days. So if they email you, you may say, I have 2 business days to respond. What that means, if they email you on Friday, they shouldn't expect a response on Sunday, but instead by the following Tuesday. This is, of course, depends on your own circumstances. The other thing to think about, though, is where is the company and where is the team? This is factored into at least one of my contracts, time zones. I've done a contract where the team is spread out all over the world. They're in different time zones in the US. They're in different time zones in the EU. They even have a few people in Asia and Australia. Making a team meeting is an interesting event. Some of those countries literally don't allow you to force workers to be there outside of work hours. So we were kind of constrained on when the meetings could be based on where those people were working. Some people were, linking up to team calls at 8, 9, 10 p.m. at night. I once had a team call at 6 in the morning. I told them I was available. I get up really early, and I said I can be available as early as 6 a.m. They took me up on that, and I had a 6 a.m. video call. You want to establish in the contract what your hours are. You may do core hours, or you may say I can be available with 24, 48 business days notice between these times. You want that in the contract so that later on they don't get upset that you weren't taking a call at 1 in the morning. Like I talked about business hours, specify whether you will ever be available on weekends or whether you can be available on weekends, depending on things. And for all those extra availabilities, like outside your core hours or on weekends, does that change your rate? Will you be billing them at a higher rate? You might say it's 150% or double for times outside of these core hours. Make sure you give your time zone too. Sometimes they will pay attention to where you live. Sometimes they won't. A very important part, now that we're talking about time, is your hours. Remember that you will be billing them. Some places bill every 2 weeks. Some do every month. Some do every quarter. I've seen all 3 of those. Decide on what's best for you. Can you go a quarter without being paid? Because keep in mind, you get paid every quarter and then you get a big check. You'll be paying estimated taxes every quarter. Do you want a big check to come in about the same time you're paying taxes, and then whatever's left over is what you live on for 3 months? So think about that. But something that I've seen in many contracts is the contracting company, the contracting company, will put a maximum number of hours per pay period. So if they're paying you every other week, they may say, and you can't work more than 80 hours. If they're paying you every month, they may say you can't work more than 160 hours. If they have a quarterly, they may work it out. What would that be? 480 hours. And the thing there is they may say you're not allowed at all. It may be verboten. You cannot go over that amount of time. It also may be that you have to get written permission, and it should specify who it is, the producer or the lead that you answer to, that person has to give you written permission so much time in advance to go over those hours. That may also be required if you say you're available weekend or outside of your core hours for an extra rate increase. They may say, okay, but you need to have written permission. And by written, that often includes email or even a Slack or phone call that you document. I prefer written ones. I prefer an email. One thing that I did with one of my contracts is I threw in minimum hours. I think this is important because if you don't do it, some companies will give you a contract, and if there's no minimum hours, they may go a few weeks, a few months, without using you at all. But you're still under contract, so you're floating around, waiting to see if any hours come in. So I threw in a minimum number of hours because it kind of reminds them, use me or cut me loose. And I've had companies that have dipped below the minimum hours, but have kept me on because they know something's coming up that they're definitely going to need my help with. And they don't want to cut me loose and then try to renegotiate a contract later, and I might not be available. So it's worth them to pay that minimum number of hours. You can decide what it is. Is it just enough? You can make it a bare number of hours just to cover whatever you do administratively to support the contract, like taxes and maintaining software that you have to pay a yearly fee on or whatever. That's up to you. But I would recommend, they will almost certainly put a maximum number of hours. I highly recommend that you do a minimum number of hours. And then the last thing I want to recommend, which is super important, and I think this is a no-brainer. I demand this. You may want to think about demanding it as well. This may be a deal breaker, is make the contract not exclusive. Several times, the company will try to make the contract exclusive, meaning you can't work anywhere else while you're on this contract. For me, that's a deal breaker. For you, if it's not a deal breaker, make sure that they understand that they're paying for exclusive use of your skills. What that generally means is your hourly rate goes up and your minimum hours per pay period also goes up, because they're basically paying you to do nothing but be available for them. Now, they may counter that and say, well, then you need to be available. Your response time needs to be lower and you need to be available nights and weekends. You can work all that out. But I'm just saying, for me, it's a deal breaker if a contract is exclusive. For you, it may not be, but look for that. There's usually in there somewhere. Anyway, again, I said I'm not a lawyer, but I have done contract work. These are some things I think you need to look for in your contract with a company. And if you're thinking about doing contract work, I hope this helped.